Okay, in this section, we're going to get just a little bit deeper into Moto. And in the past, what we've done is our help videos and then some small tutorials using item list and ShaderTree and other tools. And then we go back and we use it a little bit further. What we're trying to do in these courses is make them more succinct, easier to follow, and less chapters to go through, but still cover the same amount of information. Basically, doing what Moto is doing by making things simpler, less clicks. And what we're going to do in this course, now that we've gone through a quick start tutorial, kind of seeing the whole overview with those dice, we went through the item list. Now we're going to go through the shader tree. And from that, we're going to be done. This is going to cover everything we need to know about the shader tree, and you can go in and dive in yourself. We're not going to do a big project later coming back and using other features, so it's all contained within these few videos. So what we're going to do is come over here to the layout. Just go to that layout chooser up there. And down here at the bottom, we've got materials, environments, meshes, items, assemblies, profiles, and audio. Go to meshes, all right? And now everything should have been installed as long as you installed the content that came with your Moto software. If not, log into the site at luxology.com or the Foundry and get your content and install that. Restart Moto and you should see all of this. From there, what I want to do is go down to vehicles. Now we're going to go to automotive, and there's a NASCAR. And with any of these presets, any of these content pieces that come with Moto, you can click and drag it in, or simply double click. And that adds it to your scene. And that goes the same for anything else that's in here. And if you take a look real quick, you'll see that, let me go back up to the top, you'll see we've got some organic things like leaves, you've got trees. There's enough stuff in here to actually build a fun little scene. Most things are already shaded. And taking a step back real quick, one thing I like to do, it's actually how I learned 3D 20 plus years ago, is I would call up existing content and deconstruct it. So here's some skyscrapers that came with Moto. And what I can do is go into the shader tree and take a look at some of those surfaces and see how they're set up. And it helps me learn, okay, and then I try and apply that to something else. So just keep that in mind, just kind of a neat way to work. All right, so let's reset this. Let's close off. Let's go back here. All right, so layout, vehicles, automotive, NASCAR. And what we're going to do is apply surfaces to this and make a full scene. All right, so we've got a blank car here. It's just gray default. Got one camera, one light in the scene. I'm holding my Alt Option key and clicking and dragging to change this perspective view around. I'm not going to use the advanced viewport. I'm on my laptop. It'll run a little bit slower for me. If you've got more of a desktop with something a little bit more robust, you can. The advanced will actually show a lot of our shading and ambient occlusion and things like that in real time. And we'll come back to that and see how it looks. But for now, we're going to actually jump over to the Render tab. All right, so the Render tab, let's press the A key to fit this perspective to view, like that, and hit the play button, and we're going to see our car. Now I'm going to show you a little trick here. I actually just set my, it's not a big deal to press A up here and fit that to view and rotate it around, but I just did that in my perspective view here. And sometimes you've got a much more complex scene, so it's not one object that's easy to center. Well, there's a little trick. So let's say your perspective view looks great. Well, one thing to understand is that Moto renders from the camera view. So my camera is actually right in front of the car. And if I press O and I go to visibility and hit show cameras and show lights, you'll see that's where they are. That's what renders. That's what will come out of my system when I press F9 or I hit render up here and I render my animation. So if you have a more complex scene and you've got this, oh yeah, that looks great, and then I got to set it up again here. You don't necessarily have to. Select the camera in the item list. And then over here, there's a button under the camera view tab, sync to view. And what that does is it takes the camera and syncs it to the view of this perspective. Just a quick little tip. All right. So how do we surface this? What do we do? Well, let's take a look over here. Earlier in the dice course, we had a simple object that we created two materials. All right, those tags, as they're called, we're tagging those polygons by pressing M. We selected some polygons and we tag them basically, just the way you would put graffiti on a wall. But we're doing it on certain polygons. Well, you did that already with the dice. So here is a preset car that already has all these materials set up. We just need to color them and add some cool textures and environments and everything else. How do we work with these? Do we just guess? I mean, some are pretty clear cut: inner body, rear wing, hood part, hood pins, tanks, so on. But there's a little bit easier way, and that's this guy right up here. Let me zoom in. So we've got our items itself. So those are the mesh items: points, edges, polygons, and this one is materials. So if I select material and I click on something like this, watch what happens in the shader tree. Jumps right to the car body. It knows that material. And if I want that wheel right there, see that? See how it highlights blue? Allows me to go right to that one, and allows me to go right to that one. So it's a really terrific way to work with existing models, or even as you're building stuff, if you have to get back in to resurface something. So let's start with the body paint. We're going to select that. We have a default material. Now, as I said earlier, everything feeds up to the render. Okay, we have a base shader. This shader is actually what drives our render. We're going to talk about that in another video. Down here we have a library and we have nodes. Okay, we're not going to talk about the nodes just yet, but the library we might use. And what we're going to do is that we're going to build up each one of these materials. So we have a base material that feeds everything. If we had none of these materials set up, we would still see this because of this base material. So for example, let me come over here and close this up, turn off that NASCAR. All right, we still have a gray default material. If I turn off that base material, it's just nothing, right? The NASCAR, all these surfaces here, we just turn them all off by clicking the eyeball. This base material is still feeding everything. Well, as we built this car, or as you build the car, and you start creating material groups for everything, you really don't need this base material after a while. So I'm going to right click on that and delete it, just to keep things organized. A lot of times that's good to keep in there, and it shows that if you have that default gray and you missed a material somewhere, that'll feed through. So in the material selection mode, click on the material, goes to car body, and then over here, let's go ahead and make sure every once in a while you get extra tabs over here. Now notice it says with this Rebus, that's a plugin I have for rendering, but my render's still selected up here. So what I want to do is just kind of click away from that and then go back to the material. And what was happening is that I actually had two things selected in here, and I was seeing all of those values, all those tabs. So sometimes that can confuse you. So just select away, select back, and then you'll get just the actual properties you need. All right, so Moto 901 has a new shading model called a physically based shader. It's really terrific. You can always go back to the traditional. Let's say you got to crank something out and you got to get something done. You're not quite sure about the new settings. Go back to traditional and you should be fine. You can go to energy conserving if you want, but really the best way is use this physically based. It's going to make things look very realistic, and it's going to help cut down on your clicks. So good example is a car like this. Well, let's do this. Press the model tab, hold the shift key, and click the flat plane. All right, close that tab, and then here's the flat plane. We're going to right click. You can click on this and then call it ground, or right click on it and rename. Click the items, press the R key. We've got our scale tool, and then we can click and scale that up. And we're going to do it large enough, hopefully, to just kind of get way back in the scene there so we don't have to see the background. And then we can tilt our camera just a little bit like that. And I'm zoom it out a bit. And that just fills the ground. Spacebar will turn off that tool. Now that ground is still selected. You can see it right here. Press M and we'll create a new polygon tag for that. And we'll call it ground. So original. And give it a little bit darker gray. In fact, click the color and go to brown just a little bit. Kind of a dirty desert kind of look. We'll come back to that. All right, so there's our ground material. Let's save this, and we'll call it NASCAR. And I'm going to press W, and I'm still going to move this up just a little bit, just so those wheels are really touching, and I'm watching right there. Okay, so we've got a ground plane. Now you notice it's really shiny. Now whenever we're doing a showroom floor here, we're going to do something a little bit different. We'll come back to that. So let's go back to the car body. And let's set the color. So this physically based material, this new shader group, what that will do is help us cut down on some of our clicks and create a more realistic scene. And one of the biggest things you're going to notice if you're familiar with Moto from before is that there's no reflection amount. People kind of gotten a little confused on this. Well, in the real world, a specular amount is actually reflection. That's shine. So let's do this. We're going to click the color, choose a color of your liking. I'm going to go with something kind of a deep green for this. Okay. And right away you can see that that surface is looking pretty good. It looks a little dull though. All right. We've got a 20% specular amount. That also means it's about 20% reflective. Now the Fresnel effect, what the Fresnel effect is doing, it's allowing us to set a glancing angle. All right. And so the really good way to explain this is, let's say you had a body of water. Let's say the ground plane here is a body of water. If I were looking down into it from an angle about this, I'd see a lot of reflection, right? Just as if you're looking over a lake. If you had to go see if there's a fish in the lake or something fell in, what would you do? You'd walk up to it and you'd look straight down. And what happens is there's actually less reflection. Your glancing angle is changed. Well, that is the Fresnel effect. All right, so that's going to be on by default from now on in this physically based shader because it is a real world property. So if I change my specular amount to, let's say, 80, this car is going to be super reflective. And what's it reflecting? Well, it's reflecting the full scene. And what's in the full scene? Nothing? True, but we also have gray in that backdrop. So that's really what it's reflecting. So taking a step back, let's go here to the render presets. And under that preset there is an environment tab. And under those environments, you can choose indoor, outdoor. Here's environments. There's presets in here. So we can go to outdoor. And all you have to do is just double click any one of these. And that completely changes the environment. So let's take a look here now. So now I've got this environment back there. And this car now is reflecting all of that. I could double click any of these others. It'll override. It's a really terrific way to work. Now, if you want a studio, if you're doing some product shots, which we've done in other courses, you can very easily go into the studio and click a lightbox simulation. And you can do it for a car as well. But for now, we're going to create sort of an outdoor look. So we'll go outdoor. Let's create one of these. Just double click. All right, so that looks fine. But now it's still just reflecting all of this. Okay, maybe actually get a little blue sky in there. Right, super bright. All right, so with that, we don't want it 80% reflective. We want it more like, let's do 15. Okay, so the specular amount translates also to the reflection amount. And we're doing the full scene. Well, the next thing then is the specular color. Now it's set to white. We're not doing glass. We're not doing that kind of thing. And a car body really wouldn't have a 100% white reflection. It would be a lighter version of whatever that color might be. So we're going to do that. We're just going to make a little bit lighter reflection, and that richens up the color for us. And you can play with that, and you can even go to a blue or something like that if you want to create sort of a interesting pattern, a little better reflection. So I'm going to put a little blue in there. Now the roughness, how rough is that surface? Well, we're not doing a metal, right, so to speak. We're doing a polished metal, but we're not doing like a rough machinery. Well, if I had a really low roughness, let's say 10, that means we're going to get a shinier, more polished look. If I have 90, let's say, well, we're getting a more dull finish. Okay, so we have a higher roughness. So we're going to keep that about 10. Anisotropic, well, that is if we're going to do more metals. So we have not a round hotspot necessarily, but more of a streak. It's not going to really matter too much on this car. It might matter greatly on the rims, so we can come back and take a look, but it's going to change how that reflection shape is. So we can leave that on a little bit. I see it a little bit in here, a little bit in here, so on. All right, so it's looking pretty good. You can also see, if you turn this Fresnel to 0, take a look at the hood and the trunk. If I turn that off, see the difference? It seems kind of flat now. If I put that Fresnel back on, see that? It's got a little bit more shading to it, better reflection, more realistic, right? And that's the whole point. Now, if we have things refracting, we can put that on as well. Now, it's not really a refractive surface, but put that on, you can see the difference. The other cool thing is you can put a clear coat on. And what a clear coat is, sort of an invisible layer. It's like a wax layer. and it creates this wonderful shine. It's perfect for cars. So I set that to about 90, just so you can see the difference. Put it to 0, see that come off. So it's literally almost like you wax the car. So I'm going to set this maybe about 75%, just to give it a little more shine. All right. You can have a clear coat roughness, and I'll put this up to 90. And that's almost like you kind of buffed it out a little bit. I'm going to keep that off. And a bump layer, if we're having some bumps on there, it'll apply to that as well. All right, now we're not doing any bump maps on this yet. We'll do that on the ground later. I'm going to save my scene. Command S, Control S on the PC. All right, so you can also map anisotropic on things as well. You can put a texture map on there. But again, not really something we're going to do on the paint. We want that kind of clean and smooth. So that's looking really good. And we just did a very basic surface. Really nice. Let's do one more and we'll go on to the next video. We're going to go back here to Material to make it easy to select. And I'm going to click right on the windshield. And then it goes right to Windows. All right, so now the windows and glass and stuff like that used to be kind of a nice method I'd work with. And I had to go down here. It was really pretty quick. It's even simpler now. All I need to do is say, don't take any light from the scene. Then go to the trans category. It means transmissive properties, things that transmit through. I'm going to make my transparent amount 100% transparent. My glass is done. There used to be a lot more values I had to set, specularity, everything else, but because of this physically based values and shaders now, it makes things a lot easier. And again, if I just turn like this, the Fresnel works really well. Picks up that light and that environment. Let's take a look at this back window here. All right, so you can also change the transparent color. I can give it a little bit of a blue tint if I want. Now, if you notice, my environment's really hot, and that back window is not really coming through. Even though I'm clicking on it, that's the same material. It's not showing up. So let's go down to the environment and see what we can do about that. Our environment, I like it, but it's actually really bright. Well, what I can do is open that up just a little bit, and there's an image in there. And this image, it's a probe image like this, an HDR probe image, that carries a lot more data than 255 RGB, and that's actually what's lighting the scene. So what I want to do is come to the texture locator, and maybe I can rotate that. And so now I'm actually rotating that image in the environment. So not only does it change the reflections, it changes how bright that value is. And now I can see through my window. It was just getting completely lost and blown out. So I'm going to do it maybe about 180. Get it on the back side of the car. And then we'll save the scene. Okay? So I could have changed the environment altogether because there was actually a nice, see that white hot spot right there? See that? That was actually wrapping around and just blowing out this window. It was just entirely too bright. On the back side, though, I don't mind it so much because it's actually all back there, all that brightness way up there in the sky, and it's not reflecting in the window. All right, so Command S to save. That is just the beginning part. Let's go on to the next and start doing some of the other materials.